Welcome to the Eclectic. Some cases do not resolve into answers. They accumulate detail instead, and in doing so, they leave behind something heavier than explanation. This is one of those cases. This case will be in two parts. The summer of 1965 should have been remembered for long days on the beach, school holidays, and the carefree optimism that often accompanies youth. Instead, for many Australians, one place would become synonymous with fear. Wanda Beach lay north of Cronulla on Sydney's southern coastline. Beyond the surf and golden sand was a vast stretch of windswept dunes known as the Wanda Sandhills. To outsiders, it looked like little more than an isolated coastal wilderness. To locals, it had a very different reputation. What happened there in January 1965 would spark one of the largest murder investigations in Australian history. More than 6 decades later, the case remains unsolved. This is the story of Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock. On the afternoon of January 12, 1965, a 17-year-old boy named Peter Smith was walking through the Wanda Sandhills with his 2 younger nephews. The dunes stretched out before them, shaped by years of wind and weather. It was a lonely place, far removed from the busy beaches further south. As they made their way across the sand, Peter noticed what appeared to be a mannequin lying partially buried among the dunes. Curious, he moved closer. Almost immediately, he realized it was not a mannequin at all. It was the body of a teenage girl. Shocked and terrified, Peter turned and ran. Nearly 1.5 kilometers away stood the Wanda Surf Club. He raced there as quickly as he could, informed the caretaker of his discovery, and asked to use the telephone to contact police. Officers arrived shortly afterwards and followed Peter back to the scene. What they found would leave experienced investigators shaken. The body was not alone. Partially concealed beneath the sand lay a second teenage girl. Within hours, police connected the grim discovery to a missing persons report filed the previous evening. The victims were 15-year-old Marianne Schmidt and her best friend Christine Sharrock. The murders would dominate headlines across Australia. Newspapers, radio broadcasts and television reports all carried the same haunting story. A brutal double murder, no obvious suspect and no clear motive. As the investigation expanded, detectives would interview thousands of people, pursue leads across the country and compile a case file that eventually stretched to more than 10,000 pages. Yet despite decades of investigation, the identity of the killer remains unknown. To understand what happened at Wanda Beach, we first need to understand the 2 young girls at the centre of the story. In 1958, Helmut and Elizabeth Schmidt left Germany with their 6 children and emigrated to Australia in search of a new life. Like many migrant families of the era, their early years were not easy. They spent time living in migrant accommodation before eventually settling in the Sydney suburb of North Ryde. Not long after arriving in Australia, the family welcomed another child, a son named Norbert. Among the Schmidt children was Marianne. She was 13 years old when she first became close friends with a girl who lived next door. Her name was Christine Sharrock. Christine's life had also been shaped by loss. After the death of her father and her mother's subsequent remarriage, she chose to live with her grandparents, Jim and Jeanette Sharrock. Despite coming from different backgrounds, Marianne and Christine formed an immediate bond. Both were quiet, well-behaved teenagers. Both enjoyed music and shared a particular fondness of Elvis Presley. Neither was known for causing trouble. They attended church regularly, worked hard at school, and spent much of their free time together. Friends and family often described them as inseparable. Christine's uncle would later recall that neither girl showed much interest in boys. They rarely went out and spent most of their time centered around family, friends, and home life. Their friendship only deepened after tragedy touched both families. Christine had already lost her father. Then in 1964, Marianne's father, Helmut, died following a battle with Hodgkin's disease. Both girls understood grief at an age when few of their peers did. By the beginning of 1965, they were 15 years old and closer than ever. Just days before their disappearance, the pair travelled to Cronulla Beach. Located around 30 kilometres south of Sydney's CBD, Cronulla was one of the city's most popular seaside destinations. At the time, it held another distinction. It was the only Sydney beach easily accessible by train, making it especially attractive to teenagers without access to cars. During that New Year's Day visit, Marianne and Christine ventured further north than usual. There, they discovered Wanda Beach and the vast network of sandhills stretching behind it. Something about the area seemed to capture their imagination. The following day, Marianne returned to Cronulla with her brothers and sisters. At one point, she disappeared on her own for several hours. When she eventually rejoined the family, she explained that she'd been walking around Wanda Beach. She offered no further explanation. Around the same time, Marianne's mother, Elizabeth, was admitted to hospital for surgery. With their mother recovering, Marianne and her older brother took on additional responsibilities around the family home. On January 9th, Marianne and Christine visited Elizabeth in hospital. During the visit, Marianne asked for permission to take some of her younger siblings to Cronulla Beach the following day. Elizabeth agreed. The plan was postponed when poor weather arrived, but on the morning of Monday, January the 11th, 1965, the trip finally went ahead. As Christine prepared to leave, she mentioned to her grandmother that she wanted to visit the Wanda Sandhills again. Jeanette Sharrock immediately voiced her concerns. The younger Schmidt children would be accompanying them, and the walk was long. "Don't go today, love," she told her. "It's too far." Christine argued briefly, but her grandmother remained firm. She didn't know it then, but it would be the last conversation she would ever have with her granddaughter. Wanda is an Aboriginal word meaning sandhills by the sea. The name was fitting. Beyond the more familiar stretches of Cronulla Beach lay a landscape unlike anything else on Sydney's coastline. Wanda Beach formed part of a long, uninterrupted strip of sand extending north from Cronulla. Behind it rose the Wanda Sandhills, also known as Green Hills, a vast maze of dunes stretching towards Canal. To visitors, the sandhills could seem almost otherworldly. Wind-carved ridges rolled across the landscape. Footpaths appeared and disappeared beneath shifting sand. From certain vantage points, it was possible to look in every direction and see no one at all. But beneath that natural beauty was a darker reputation. Locals often described the area as Sydney's loneliest beach. It was isolated, difficult to patrol, and largely hidden from public view. Discarded rubbish littered many parts of the dunes, broken bottles, rusted cans, abandoned household items, and old tyres could often be found half buried beneath the sand. More significantly, the isolation attracted people seeking privacy. At a time when homosexuality was still legal in Australia, some men used the sandhills as a discreet meeting place. Other visitors included nude sunbathers, voyeurs, exhibitionists, and men known to harass women who ventured into the area alone. Many local families regarded the dunes as somewhere their children should avoid. Marianne and Christine, however, were not local. Living in North Ryde, they were unlikely to have known much about Wanda's reputation. Information did not travel with the speed it does today, and there was no internet warning visitors about dangerous locations or local trouble spots. To two 15-year-old girls, the sandhills may simply have seemed like an adventure. That Monday morning, Marianne packed sandwiches and fruit while Christine brought a thermos of cordial and a £1 note to buy lunch later in the day. At around 8:30 a.m, the two girls left for West Ryde railway station, accompanied by four of Marianne's younger siblings. 9-year-old Trixie, 10-year-old Peter, 7-year-old Wolfgang, and 5-year-old Norbert. Marianne's older brothers remained at home to complete household chores. The journey to Cronulla required a change of trains at Redfern Station and took close to 2 hours. During the first leg of the trip, an unfamiliar teenage boy struck up a conversation with Marianne and Christine. He appeared to be about their age. Nobody knows what was discussed. What is known is that he did not continue travelling with them after the train changed at Redfern, and the girls were not seen speaking with anyone else during the remainder of the journey. By around 11 o'clock, the group arrived at Cronulla. The weather was far from ideal. Strong winds battered the coastline and dangerous surf conditions had forced the beach to close. Most people might have decided to head home. Instead, the group made their way to the southern end of Cronulla Beach and spent time exploring the rocks. At one point, Wolfgang repeatedly asked Marianne to take him swimming. Eventually, she relented. Finding a more sheltered location away from the rough surf, she allowed him a brief swim before returning to join the others. The children settled on the rocks and ate lunch together. It was some time around then that Wolfgang noticed Marianne and Christine speaking with another teenage boy. The boy appeared to be searching for crabs using a homemade spear. He was described as being around 16 years old, of medium build, with fair hair. Wolfgang could not hear the conversation. At the time, there seemed to be little reason to pay attention. It would later become one of the most important sightings in the entire investigation. After lunch, Marianne suggested they walk north towards Wanda Sandhills. The others agreed. Leaving their belongings behind, the group began the 2-kilometre journey along the beach. The further north they travelled, the harsher the conditions became. Strong winds swept across the shoreline, lifting sand into the air and stinging exposed skin. What had begun as a leisurely walk quickly became exhausting for the younger children. Eventually, they reached a more sheltered spot. Wolfgang found some protection from the wind and the children stopped to rest. It was then that Marianne and Christine told the younger children they were going back to collect their belongings before heading home. They estimated they would only be gone for 20 minutes. At first, everything seemed normal. Then the younger children noticed something strange. Instead of turning south towards the rocks where their belongings had been left, Marianne and Christine continued north, towards the sandhills. Peter called out to them, "You're going the wrong way!" The girls simply laughed and continued walking. Within moments, they disappeared further into the dunes. About 10 minutes later, Peter asked Wolfgang to go after them. The 7-year-old reluctantly set off. As he approached the sandhills, he spotted Marianne and Christine once more. They were no longer alone. Standing with them was a teenage boy. Wolfgang would later describe him as a big boy with tan skin and long, light-coloured hair. White zinc cream covered his nose. He wore grey trousers but no shirt and carried a blue towel. To Wolfgang, he looked like a surfer, but something else stood out. The boy appeared angry. According to Wolfgang, he was demanding to know the girls' names. What happened next would become one of the most debated moments in the entire case. Wolfgang watched as Marianne and Christine followed the boy deeper into the sandhills. He did not follow. Whether it was because he felt intimidated, frightened, or simply lost interest is impossible to know. What is certain is that he turned back. Approximately 10 minutes later, Wolfgang noticed the same boy emerging from the dunes. This time he was alone. The blue towel was draped around his neck. Wolfgang approached him. "Where are the girls?" The teenager did not answer. He walked straight past and continued on his way. At the time, Wolfgang thought little of it. The significance of that encounter would only become clear later. For decades, investigators, journalists, and armchair detectives have debated why Marianne and Christine entered the sandhills that day. Were they meeting someone? Had they arranged to see a boy? Or had they simply encountered someone while exploring the dunes? There are arguments supporting each possibility. Christine had specifically mentioned wanting to visit the sandhills before leaving home that morning. Despite poor weather and 4 younger children in tow, the pair had remained determined to make the journey. Yet there was also a problem with the theory that a meeting had been arranged. The girls had originally planned to visit the beach the day before, only changing their plans because of the bad weather. In 1965, there were no mobile phones, text messages, or social media accounts. Rearranging a meeting at short notice was not simple. If they had intended to meet someone, it may have been somebody they encountered that very day. Another witness would later add an unsettling detail. A man named Dennis Doyston reported seeing 2 girls matching Marianne and Christine's description, moving hurriedly through the sandhills. One repeatedly glanced over her shoulder, as though checking whether someone was following. Dennis saw nobody else nearby. At the time, he thought nothing of it. Meanwhile, the younger Schmidt children continued waiting. 20 minutes passed, then 30, then an hour. There was still no sign of Marianne or Christine. Eventually the children began searching for them. They called out their names. They looked around the nearby dunes. Nothing. As the afternoon wore on, concern slowly gave way to worry. The last train back to Sydney would leave Cronulla at 6 o'clock. If they missed it, getting home would become difficult. Faced with an impossible decision, the children eventually abandoned the search. They returned to the rocks where their belongings had been left. Everything remained exactly where it had been, untouched. The sight offered little comfort. As daylight faded, the 4 children boarded the final train and made the long journey home without Marianne and Christine. They arrived after 8 o'clock that evening. Both families were informed, police were contacted, a missing persons report was filed. At first, officers treated the matter cautiously rather than urgently. Marianne and Christine had not been abducted in front of witnesses. They had walked away of their own accord. Police asked the usual questions. Had they run away before? Did they have boyfriends? Were there friends or relatives they might have visited? But the answers only deepened the mystery. Both girls came from stable homes. Neither had a history of running away, and neither would have been expected to abandon 4 younger children without explanation. Description of the girls was circulated to police stations throughout Sydney. Then everyone waited. As night fell, Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock were already dead. No one knew it yet. The following afternoon, the terrible truth would be discovered. The following afternoon, Tuesday, January 12th, 1965, 17-year-old Peter Smith was walking through the Wanda Sandhills with his 2 younger nephews. The dunes were quiet. Apart from the constant wind moving across the landscape, there was little sound at all. The isolation was one of the defining features of the area. Even on a summer day, it was possible to walk for long stretches without seeing another person. As the 3 made their way across the sand, Peter noticed what appeared to be a mannequin, lying partially buried among the dunes. At first glance, it seemed odd, but not alarming. Then he moved closer. The reality was far worse. What he had found was the body of a teenage girl. Panicked, Peter immediately turned and ran. Roughly 1,500 meters away stood the Wanda Surf Club. Breathless and shaken, he reached the building and informed the caretaker of his discovery before using the telephone to contact the police. Officers arrived shortly afterwards. Peter led them back through the sandhills. The discovery was horrifying enough. Then it became even worse. As investigators examined the scene, they noticed something protruding from beneath the sand nearby. Another foot, and another. There was a second victim. Within hours, detectives linked the discovery to the missing persons report filed the previous evening. The 2 girls were identified as Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock. News of the murders spread rapidly. Sydney awoke to the horrifying reality that 2 15-year-old teenage girls had vanished from a beach crowded with holidaymakers and had been brutally murdered less than 24 hours later. The crime scene was immediately sealed off. Local detectives were joined by homicide investigators and forensic specialists as teams began the painstaking task of documenting every possible detail. Portable lighting was brought in as daylight faded and investigators worked long into the night. The location itself immediately struck detectives. The girls had been found approximately 1,500 meters north of the Wanda Surf Club and around 150 meters inland from the water's edge. Although technically only a short distance from the beach, the area felt completely cut off from the outside world. Marianne's brother Hans would later visit the scene and struggle to comprehend just how isolated it was. He recalled that even standing there, only a short distance from the ocean, he could barely hear the waves. It was eerily quiet. The dunes absorbed sound. The landscape concealed movement. Anyone in trouble there could easily go unseen. And perhaps, more chillingly, unheard. Investigators soon discovered evidence of a violent struggle. A drag mark stretching approximately 32 meters cut across the sand. Nearby were bloodstains and signs of a sustained attack. The physical evidence suggested that the murders had unfolded with shocking violence. Detectives believed Marianne had likely been attacked first. Evidence at the scene suggested she had been knocked to the ground before being stabbed repeatedly. Christine appeared to have been attacked a short distance away. One theory was that she had witnessed the assault on her friend and attempted to escape, only to be caught moments later. Afterwards, her body appeared to have been dragged back across the sand. The drag marks revealed another intriguing detail. Every few meters, investigators noted heavier concentrations of blood. The pattern suggested that whoever had been dragging Christine's body had stopped several times along the way. Given Christine's slight build, some detectives wondered whether the killer might not have been particularly strong. It was one of the few clues the scene appeared willing to offer. Nearby, investigators also located tire tracks approximately 30 meters from where Christine had been attacked. Whether they were connected to the murders was impossible to determine. The Sandhills were regularly visited by vehicles, and the tracks could easily have belonged to someone entirely unrelated to the crime. It was equally possible that the killer had fled on foot. Numerous paths led away from the dunes towards Captain Cook Drive and surrounding areas. The more investigators examined the landscape, the clearer one thing became. The killer had chosen a location that offered both privacy and multiple escape routes. Then came the post-mortem examination. The findings shocked even experienced detectives. Both girls had suffered savage injuries. Christine's official cause of death was determined to be hemorrhage, caused by multiple penetrating wounds to the chest, combined with severe head injuries that included a fractured skull and damage to the brain. Marianne had died from hemorrhage caused by a cut throat and multiple stab wounds to the chest. The brutality of the attack was unmistakable. There was evidence that both girls had been sexually assaulted. Investigators also recovered semen from Marianne's body. The full extent of the injuries sustained by the girls has never been publicly released. Even decades later, authorities have chosen to withhold certain details. The violence inflicted upon Marianne and Christine was considered too disturbing. Determining the exact time of death proved difficult. The bodies had been partially covered by sand, and the intense summer heat complicated forensic estimates. Investigators ultimately concluded that the murders had likely occurred sometime between 2 o'clock on Monday afternoon and midnight that evening. That broad window raised as many questions as it answered, but one discovery stood out above all others. Inside Christine's stomach were partially digested traces of cabbage and celery. The finding immediately caught investigators' attention. Family members had already confirmed what the group had taken to the beach that day. Sandwiches, fruit, cordial. Nothing containing cabbage. Nothing containing celery. Forensic examination suggested the food had been consumed within roughly an hour of Christine's death. The implication was deeply troubling. At some point after leaving the younger children behind, Christine had eaten food that she had not brought with her, and she had almost certainly eaten it with someone else. Another finding raised further questions. Christine had a small amount of alcohol in her system. Not enough to indicate intoxication, but enough to establish that she had consumed alcohol shortly before her death. Marianne, meanwhile, had no alcohol in her system whatsoever. For Christine's family, the revelation was difficult to understand. Those who knew her insisted she disliked alcohol and had never shown any interest in drinking. Combined with the unusual food found in her stomach, investigators began considering an unsettling possibility. Had the girls accepted food and drink from someone they trusted, or someone they had only recently met? It was impossible to say. But the findings suggested that at least part of the interaction between the girls and their killer may not have begun with immediate violence, at least not at first. The injuries themselves suggested the attacker had used a knife. Detectives believed the weapon may have been a fishing knife or something similar. They also believed a second object had likely been used during the attack on Christine. Possibilities included a rock, a metal pipe, or a piece of timber. The murder weapon was nowhere to be found, nor was the object believed to have caused Christine's head injuries. The killer had taken those answers with him. For detectives, the challenge was now clear. They had 2 murdered schoolgirls, a vast and isolated crime scene, almost no physical evidence, and a witness description provided by a traumatized 7-year-old boy. Yet somewhere, within those fragments, lay the identity of the person responsible. The investigation that followed would become one of the largest and most exhaustive murder inquiries in Australian history. And at the centre of it all was a teenage stranger known only by a single description, the Surfy. By the time the sun rose over Sydney on January 13th, 1965, news of the Wanda Beach murders was everywhere. Newspapers carried the story across their front pages. Radio bulletins interrupted regular programming. Television reports delivered updates throughout the day. The public reaction was immediate. Parents looked at their children differently. Teenagers who'd spent countless summer days travelling to beaches suddenly found themselves under stricter supervision. For many Australians, the murders shattered the assumption that young people could safely spend a day at the seaside and return home without incident. Somewhere in Sydney, a killer had murdered 2 schoolgirls and vanished without leaving an obvious trail behind. Detectives knew they had to move quickly. Their first priority was reconstructing Marianne and Christine's final known movements. The only people who had seen them alive shortly before their disappearance were Marianne's younger siblings. Among them, 7-year-old Wolfgang Schmidt had suddenly become one of the most important witnesses in Australia. The day after the bodies were discovered, police took Wolfgang, Peter, Trixie and Norbert back to Wanda Beach. The children were asked to retrace their steps and explain everything they remembered from that Monday afternoon. The process must have been bewildering. Even more tragically, at that stage, the younger children still did not fully understand what had happened. They had been searching for Marianne. They did not yet comprehend the full horror of her fate. As detectives carefully questioned Wolfgang, a crucial detail emerged. For the first time, he described the teenage boy he had seen with Marianne and Christine shortly before they vanished into the Sandhills. The description immediately captured investigators' attention. The boy appeared to be around 16 years old. He had tan skin, long fair hair, a blue towel and grey trousers, and white zinc cream across his nose. To Wolfgang, he had looked like a surfer. Within hours, the mysterious teenager became the central focus of the investigation. The media quickly gave him a name, the Surfy. It was a description rather than an identity, but it was all detectives had. As reports spread throughout Sydney, police appealed directly to the public. Had anyone seen this young man? Did anyone recognise the description? Had he come home with unexplained injuries, unusual behaviour, or a suspicious story? The response was overwhelming. Calls began flooding into the police station almost immediately. The problem was obvious. In coastal Sydney during the mid-1960s, there were countless young men who fit that description. Long hair, tan skin, beach culture, surfboards. To many people, Wolfgang's description seemed to match half the teenage boys in the Sutherland Shire. Even so, detectives could not afford to dismiss it. It remained the last confirmed sighting of Marianne and Christine alive. As the search intensified, another important point emerged. Police were careful to stress that they did not automatically believe the Surfy was the killer. He might have been, but he might also have been an innocent witness. If he had seen the girls shortly before their deaths, detectives desperately wanted to speak with him. The hope was simple. If the teenager came forward voluntarily, he could either eliminate himself from the investigation or provide information that might lead detectives in the new direction. Instead, he vanished. Days passed, then weeks. No one came forward claiming to be the mysterious boy. If he had seen the media coverage, he chose not to identify himself, and that decision only deepened suspicion. The public quickly became fixated on the Surfy. Every new sighting generated fresh headlines. Every teenage boy with long hair became a potential suspect. Rumours spread rapidly. Speculation flourished. At times, the investigation seemed in danger of being overwhelmed by its own publicity. One report claimed a teenager matching the description had previously been chased from the beach for harassing young girls. Another claimed police had detained several suspects. In reality, many of those stories proved inaccurate or misleading. Some of the young men mentioned in newspaper reports had absolutely no connection to the Wanda Beach murders. Their only crime was resembling the description provided by Wolfgang. Meanwhile, detectives continued searching the crime scene, and the scale of the operation was extraordinary. Hundreds of police officers were eventually involved. Additional personnel were brought in from across Sydney. Cadets assisted with searches, army specialists provided equipment. Every available lead was pursued. The Wanda Sandhills themselves presented a unique challenge. Years of discarded rubbish had transformed the dunes into a nightmare for investigators. Broken bottles, rusted metal, old tools, abandoned household items. The landscape was littered with debris. Every potential clue had to be examined, and most turned out to be completely unrelated. Knives were recovered. Discarded clothing was recovered. Numerous suspicious items were recovered. One after another, they were eliminated. Still, the search continued. Eventually, detectives brought in heavy machinery. A front-end loader began removing sections of sand, which were then sifted in the hope that some overlooked piece of evidence might emerge. Army personnel equipped with metal detectors joined the effort. Hundreds of tons of sand was searched. The results were frustratingly limited. After all that work, investigators recovered only one item that appeared potentially significant. A small fragment of a broken knife blade. The piece measured roughly an inch in length and tested positive for traces of blood. For a brief moment, hope rose. Could this be part of the murder weapon? Unfortunately, the technology of the era offered few answers. The blood sample was too small for meaningful analysis. DNA testing would not exist for another 2 decades. Even worse, forensic experts could not agree on whether the fragment was connected to the murders at all. Some injuries appeared inconsistent with such a small piece of blade. Others potentially matched. The evidence was inconclusive. Another possible clue disappeared into an uncertainty. As investigators searched for physical evidence, they also began examining Marianne and Christine's lives in greater detail. Diaries, friends, school acquaintances, family members, every aspect of their daily routines came under scrutiny. What detectives found largely reinforced the picture already painted by those who knew the girls. Neither Marianne nor Christine appeared to be leading secret lives. There were no hidden relationships, no known enemies, no obvious links to dangerous individuals, yet their diaries did reveal one interesting detail. During their New Year's Day visit to Cronulla Beach, the girls had met 2 teenage boys. According to the entries, they had spent time together and shared a kiss. Detectives immediately tracked down the boys. The possibility that one of them might have arranged a meeting at Wanda Beach could not be ignored. The boys, identified publicly only as Ted and Jim, cooperated fully. They confirmed meeting Marianne and Christine. However, both insisted there had been no plans for a future rendezvous. Their accounts were investigated. Their alibis were checked. Neither of them remained a suspect for long. Once again, detectives found themselves back at the beginning. And still, the Surfy remained unidentified. As January wore on, pressure mounted. Police Commissioner Norman Allen made repeated public appeals. Each statement carried the same message. Someone knew something. Someone had seen something. And someone was staying silent. The Commissioner urged the mysterious teenager to come forward, not as a suspect, as a witness. He stressed repeatedly that simply being seen near Marianne and Christine did not make the young man a murderer. If anything, detectives hoped he might hold the missing piece of information that could finally explain what happened inside the Sandhills. But the appeals achieved nothing. The Surfy never appeared, and as the investigation entered its second week, one unsettling possibility began to take hold. What if the last person seen with Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock was not merely a witness? What if he was the killer himself? As the days turned into weeks, the investigation continued to grow. The number of detectives assigned to the case swelled. Tips arrived from across New South Wales and beyond. Every phone call had to be logged, assessed and followed up. Every name had to be checked. Some investigators later wondered whether crucial information may have been lost amongst the sheer volume of reports pouring in. The public had become obsessed with finding the Surfy. Unfortunately, obsession does not always produce clarity. It often produces noise, and there was now a great deal of noise surrounding the Wanda Beach murders. On January 15th, Marianne's mother, Elizabeth Schmidt, spoke publicly for the first time since the deaths of the girls. She was still recovering in hospital following surgery. Only days earlier, she had granted Marianne permission to take her younger siblings to the beach. Now, she found herself grieving the loss of her daughter. Despite her heartbreak, Elizabeth spoke with remarkable composure. She said that Marianne and Christine had entered eternal life and expressed the belief that the person responsible would forever be haunted by what he had done. It was a statement marked less by anger than by sorrow, but her words also reflected a hope shared by countless others that the killer would one day be identified and held accountable. Meanwhile, police pressure and continued increase, Commissioner Allen again appealed directly to the Surfy. He stressed that the young man should not allow media speculation to frighten him away. Detectives did not know whether he was guilty, innocent, or simply unfortunate enough to have been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But they desperately needed to speak with him. Still nothing. No name, no appearance, and no explanation. The mysterious teenager seemed to have vanished completely. By this stage, investigators had interviewed dozens of people known to have been at Wanda Beach on January the 11th. Yet the picture remained frustratingly incomplete. One witness who continued to attract attention was Dennis Doyston, the man who believed he had seen Marianne and Christine hurrying through the sandhills shortly before they disappeared. His account suggested the girls may have been uneasy, perhaps even frightened, but without knowing who or what they were looking at, detectives could draw no firm conclusions. Another lead faded away. On January 18th, a fresh wave of excitement swept through the investigation. Reports emerged that a teenage boy was being questioned after blood-stained trousers were discovered on Coogee Beach. The media immediately seized upon the story. Many assumed detectives had finally found their man. Wolfgang Schmidt was brought in to view a lineup. The result was disappointing. He did not identify the teenager. Further investigation established that the blood on the trousers had an innocent explanation, and that the boy had no connection whatsoever to the murders. It was another dead end, and there would be many more. As detectives widened their inquiries, they became increasingly interested in everyone who had been present at Wanda Beach on the day of the murders. The challenge was enormous. The beach had not been deserted. People had been walking, fishing, sunbathing, and exploring throughout the day. Some witnesses had already come forward, others had not. Investigators began compiling a list of every unidentified individual known to have been in the area, and it was a surprisingly long list. One of the most important witnesses in this regard was a 57-year-old man named Francis Williams. Francis had been at Wanda Beach on January the 11th and remembered seeing Marianne and Christine and the younger Schmidt children heading north towards the sandhills. According to his recollection, the group appeared to be moving quickly, almost as though they were in a hurry. But Francis also remembered seeing a number of other people scattered around the dunes that afternoon. Some of those sightings would become deeply intriguing. There was a man sunbathing among the sandhills. When Francis approached, the individual abruptly got up and walked away. There were 2 boys playing in the beach, several fishermen, a man lying beneath a sheet of corrugated iron, another unidentified male who later drove away in a utility vehicle, and a woman whose vehicle had become bogged in the sand. None of these sightings seemed especially significant on their own. Taken together, however, they highlighted a frustrating reality. There were numerous people in the vicinity of the crime scene that day. Many were never identified, many were never interviewed, and some never came forward despite repeated public appeals. Detectives released details of these individuals to the media, hoping someone would recognize them. The woman whose vehicle had become bogged contacted police. Unfortunately, she was unable to provide any information of value. The others remained unknown. Their silence fueled endless speculation, but there may have been a simple explanation. Wanda's reputation preceded it. Many visitors to the sandhills had legitimate reasons for not wanting their names appearing in newspapers, reports, or police files. Given the social attitudes of the era, some people may have feared embarrassment, exposure, or judgment more than they feared becoming involved in a murder investigation. If they had seen something important, that information may have remained hidden. On January 20th, Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock were laid to rest. The funerals drew hundreds of mourners. Family members, friends, neighbours, and strangers gathered to pay their respects. But among the mourners were also detectives. Police photographers discreetly documented those in attendance. Investigators were operating on a theory that has appeared in countless murder investigations over the years. Sometimes, Killers attend the funerals of their victims, whether driven by guilt, curiosity, arrogance, or a desire to relive the crime. Some offenders insert themselves back into the aftermath. Detectives could not ignore the possibility. As a result, many of the men attending the services were photographed and scrutinized. No breakthrough followed, though. If the killer attended, he left unnoticed. Yet another opportunity slipped away. As January progressed, the investigation seemed trapped in a frustrating cycle. A promising lead would emerge, hope would build, and the lead would collapse. Despite the enormous resources being devoted to the case, detectives remained no closer to identifying the person responsible. What they did know was deeply unsettling. Somewhere in the community was an individual capable of extraordinary violence. Someone who had murdered 2 teenage girls. Someone who had escaped one of the largest police dragnets Australia had ever seen. And perhaps, most troubling of all, someone who appeared entirely comfortable remaining silent while an entire nation searched for answers. By late January, investigators began to fear that solving the case would require more than witness statements and public appeals. They needed something concrete, a mistake, a confession, a piece of evidence, anything. Without it, the trail was already beginning to grow cold. By February, the Wanda Beach murders had become one of the most discussed crimes in Australia. The public fascination showed no sign of fading. Every newspaper update was scrutinized, every rumor was repeated, every supposed sighting generated fresh speculation. Yet behind the headlines, detectives were becoming increasingly frustrated. They had interviewed hundreds of witnesses. They had searched the Sandhills extensively. They had pursued countless leads. And still, they had no suspect. No murder weapon, no confession, and no arrest. The pressure on investigators was immense. Senior police knew that public confidence was beginning to depend upon visible progress, so fresh appeals were made through the media. The message remained consistent. Someone knew something. Somewhere, there was a witness who had either not come forward or had dismissed what they saw as insignificant. Detectives urged anyone who had been at Wanda Beach on January the 11th to contact police, no matter how trivial their information might seem. At the same time, investigators sought assistance from psychiatrists and behavioral experts in an attempt to better understand the type of person capable of committing such a crime. The resulting profile painted a disturbing picture. Experts suggested the killer was likely a young male with deep-seated sexual and emotional problems, someone who struggled to form normal relationships, someone who harbored resentment towards women, someone who may have displayed violent tendencies long before the murders occurred. The profile also suggested another possibility. The attack appeared unusually frenzied. The level of violence inflicted upon Marianne and Christine suggested intense rage. This was not a calculated, detached killing. It felt personal. Not necessarily because the killer knew the girls, but because something about the encounter had triggered a powerful emotional response. Whether that assessment was accurate remains unknown, but it reinforced a growing belief among investigators that the murders may not have been entirely random. In an effort to generate new leads, authorities announced a substantial reward. For a brief period, the announcement created renewed optimism. Surely someone would come forward. Surely a friend, relative, or acquaintance would recognize the description of the Surfy and contact police. Instead, investigators found themselves dealing with another flood of misinformation. Many callers genuinely wanted to help. Others simply wanted attention. Some offered theories, others named neighbours, co-workers, or former boyfriends. Most of the information went nowhere. Yet buried amongst the dead ends were a handful of genuinely intriguing reports. One came from a woman who had visited Wanda Beach on the day of the murders. She described seeing a naked man moving through the dunes. At first glance, the sighting did not seem particularly unusual. The Sandhills had long attracted nude sunbathers. But the timing caught detectives' attention. The man had been observed in the broader area around the time Marianne and Christine had disappeared. Unfortunately, the description was vague. Police could not identify him, nor could they establish whether he had any connection to the murders. He joined the growing list of unidentified individuals known to have been in the vicinity that day. Then another potential clue emerged. During the investigation, police learned of a blue towel that had been discovered in the Sandhills. The detail immediately raised interest. Wolfgang Schmidt had consistently described the mysterious Surfy as carrying a blue towel around his neck when he emerged from the dunes alone. Could this be the same towel? Investigators examined the possibility carefully. Unfortunately, certainty proved impossible. The towel could not be conclusively linked to the murders, nor could it be connected to any specific individual. Once again, the detectives were left with more questions than answers. As weeks became months, the importance of Wolfgang Schmidt's evidence only increased. He remained the last person known to have seen Marianne and Christine alive. Yet, as often happens with young witnesses recalling traumatic events, some aspects of his recollections evolved over time. This would later become a source of controversy, not because anyone doubted Wolfgang's honesty, quite the opposite. Most investigators believed he was doing his best to recall events that had occurred during an extraordinarily distressing day. But memory is complicated, especially the memory of a 7-year-old child. As Wolfgang was interviewed repeatedly, additional details emerged. Among them was a recollection that the Surfy may have been carrying a knife. The detail attracted immediate attention. If true, it would significantly strengthen the case against the unidentified teenager. However, there was a problem. The knife had not featured prominently in Wolfgang's earliest accounts. Critics argued that repeated questioning may have unintentionally influenced certain memories. Supporters countered that traumatized witnesses often remember details gradually rather than all at once. The debate would continue for decades. Regardless of which interpretation was correct, one fact remained unchanged. Wolfgang had seen Marianne and Christine enter the Sandhills with a teenage male. Minutes later, he had seen the same male emerge alone. No amount of debate altered that reality. Detectives remained convinced that identifying the Surfy was the key to solving the case. As the investigation continued, artists worked closely with witnesses to produce facial composites. The sketches were distributed widely. Newspapers printed them, police stations displayed them. Copies were circulated throughout New South Wales. 6 different composite images were eventually released. Each represented a person investigators believed might have information about the murders. Some were possible suspects, others were simply unidentified witnesses. The public response was immediate. Hundreds of names were submitted. Detectives worked through them one by one. Most were quickly eliminated. The sketches generated publicity, but not progress. Months after the murders, police were still searching for people who had been present on the beach that day, still trying to identify faces, still hoping one witness would finally provide the breakthrough they needed. Yet despite all their efforts, the investigation was beginning to stall. The initial flood of information had slowed. New leads were becoming increasingly rare, and the longer the case remained unsolved, the more difficult it became to separate meaningful information from speculation. For the families of Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock, every passing week brought fresh disappointment. Each newspaper headline promised hope. Each new appeal suggested a breakthrough might be imminent. And each time that hope faded, the killer remained free, unidentified, and seemingly untouchable. What investigators did not yet realize was that some of the most intriguing witnesses in the entire case had still not been identified. Men seen moving through the Sandhills, strangers approaching women, individuals behaving strangely before and after the murders, people who may have held crucial information, or who may have been something far more sinister. The deeper detectives dug into Wanda Beach, the stranger the picture became. The longer the investigation continued, the more detectives became convinced of one thing. Someone had seen something. The challenge was finding that person. Throughout the first half of 1965, police continued tracing every witness they could identify from Wanda Beach and the surrounding Sandhills. Many of the people eventually located had seen nothing of significance. Others, however, provided accounts that added yet another layer of mystery to an already baffling case. One witness described a man who had been frequenting the area in the days leading up to the murders. He stood out because of his appearance and behaviour. The man was estimated to be between 35 and 40 years old, around 5 feet 8 inches tall, with a medium build and dark hair. He was known to carry an orange and white towel, and had reportedly been seen wearing grey trousers, a white shirt, and carrying a newspaper and portable radio. More concerning were the reports of his interactions with women. According to witnesses, he approached several women on the beach, displaying pornographic photographs and asking them sexually explicit questions. At least some of the women he spoke to remembered him claiming to be from South Australia. Police considered him important enough to publicly appeal for information. Yet, despite the widespread publicity surrounding the case, he never came forward, nor was he ever identified. Then there was another man, much younger. Witnesses described him as being between 18 and 20 years old, slim with light brown hair and several missing teeth. He had reportedly been wearing a long-sleeved shirt tucked into fawn-coloured trousers. According to reports, he spent time approaching women on the beach and propositioning them for sex. Like the older man, he disappeared. Decades later, neither individual has been conclusively identified. Whether either man had any connection to the murders remains unknown, but their existence reinforced a troubling reality. The Wanda Sandhills were attracting exactly the kind of individuals detectives needed to investigate. As police chased leads, another curious development emerged. On May 29th, a group of local youths approached authorities with information they claimed to have been holding for months. A few days after the murders, they said, they had discovered a pair of flippers and a homemade crab spear approximately 1 kilometre from the crime scene. The items had eventually been handed to the police. What puzzled investigators was not the discovery itself, but the delay. More than 4 months had passed before the information came to light. Why the boys had waited so long was never clearly explained. The crab spear immediately drew attention because of Wolfgang Schmidt's earlier recollection. Remember the teenage boy he had seen speaking with Marianne and Christine near the rocks? The one searching for crabs? Investigators wondered whether the spear might be connected to that sighting. Wolfgang was questioned again. Unfortunately, he could not say with certainty whether it was the same spear. Once more, the investigation found itself tantalizingly close to a possible breakthrough without quite reaching one. By the end of 1965, the enormous police operation that had dominated headlines for months was beginning to lose momentum. This was not because the detectives had stopped caring, far from it. But major investigations require resources, and resources are finite. At its peak, around 40 detectives had been assigned to the Wanda Beach case. As the months passed and no major developments emerged, those numbers gradually fell. 40 became 20, 20 became 12. Eventually, only a small core group remained dedicated to the investigation full-time. The reduction reflected a harsh reality faced by every major unsolved case. New crimes continued to occur, new victims required attention, and despite thousands of interviews and countless hours of investigative work, the Wanda Beach murders remained stubbornly resistant to resolution. Even so, police refused to abandon the area entirely. Officers continued conducting patrols through the Wanda Sandhills, partly in the hope of finding fresh evidence, partly because of what the investigation had revealed about the location itself. The patrols resulted in numerous arrests for sexual offences and other crimes, yet none brought investigators any closer to identifying Marianne and Christine's killer. Then, just over a year after the murders, another brutal killing captured public attention. On January 29, 1966, 57-year-old Wilhelmina Kruger was found murdered at the Piccadilly shopping arcade in Wollongong, where she worked as a cleaner. She had been attacked during the early hours of the morning. The crime scene was disturbing. Wilhelmina had suffered a frenzied knife attack. There were no obvious witnesses, no immediate suspects, and no attempt had been made to conceal her body. For some investigators and journalists, the similarities to Wanda Beach were impossible to ignore. Both crimes involved extreme violence. Both appeared motiveless. Both lacked clear suspects, and geographically, Wollongong was less than an hour's drive from Wanda Beach. Speculation began almost immediately. Could the same offender be responsible? Police examined the possibility carefully. But before any conclusions could be reached, another murder occurred. On February 26, 1966, the body of 27-year-old Anna Dowling-Cower was discovered on Old Illawarra Road in Sydney South. Once again, investigators encountered familiar themes: a secluded location, a frenzied knife attack, no witnesses, no obvious suspect, no meaningful physical evidence. Anna, a sex worker, had last been seen leaving King's Cross Club after telling people she was meeting a client. She never returned. Police became increasingly convinced that the murders of Wilhelmina Kruger and Anna Dowling-Cower were connected. The similarities between those two crimes were striking. Whether either had any relationship to Wanda Beach was another question entirely. No evidence has ever established a definitive link. Nevertheless, the possibility captured public imagination. Some wondered whether a serial killer had been operating across New South Wales during the mid-1960s, a predator moving between beaches, roadsides and suburban shopping centres, a killer whose crimes remained hidden beneath the limitations of forensic science at the time. It remains only a theory, but it is one that has never completely disappeared. Back in Sydney, the Wanda Beach investigation continued grinding forward, slowly, methodically, and increasingly without results. By April of 1966, more than a year had passed since Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock were murdered. The case file had grown to extraordinary proportions, thousands upon thousands of pages, thousands of interviews, thousands of leads. Yet despite all of it, detectives remained where they had begun. They still did not know who had led the girls into the Sandhills. They still did not know who had killed them, and they still did not know why. The next major development would come not from detectives in the field, but from a coronial inquest that sought to examine everything investigators had learned, and everything they still didn't know. The coronial inquest into the deaths of Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock began on April 20, 1966. By that point, more than 15 months had passed since the murders. The initial shock had faded. The headlines were less frequent. The crowds of reporters were similar, but the questions remained exactly the same. Who killed the girls? And why? The inquest provided the public with its clearest glimpse yet into the scale of the investigation. The figures were staggering. Detectives had compiled an investigation log running to more than 5,000 pages. More than 7,000 interviews had been conducted. Countless leads had been pursued across Sydney and beyond. Few murder investigations in Australian history had generated such an enormous volume of material. Yet, despite all of that effort, police still had no suspect. Over the course of 3 days, witnesses were called to give evidence. Among the most important were the Schmidt children. Once again, attention focused on the events of January the 11th, 1965. The train journey, the walk along the beach, the mysterious teenage boy, and the final sighting of Marianne and Christine alive. The coroner listened carefully to the evidence presented. There was no uncertainty regarding the cause of death. The conclusion was obvious. The girls had been the victims of what he described as a vicious and brutal double murder. But beyond that, certainty quickly disappeared. The identity of the killer remained unknown. The motive remained unknown. And the sequence of events inside the Sandhills remained frustratingly incomplete. At the conclusion of the proceedings, the coroner expressed a belief shared by many investigators. Somewhere, someone possessed information that could help solve the case. Perhaps they were protecting a friend. Perhaps they feared the consequences of speaking. Perhaps they simply did not realize the importance of what they knew. Whatever the reason, the coroner hoped further information might still emerge. Police echoed those sentiments. Following the inquest, investigators announced they would once again review the entire case file, every interview, every witness statement, and every lead. Every scrap of information would be re-examined in the hope that something important had been overlooked. It was an enormous undertaking. But detectives understood that many cold cases are solved not through the dramatic breakthroughs, but through details that were initially dismissed as insignificant. Unfortunately, the review produced no miracle. There was no forgotten confession, no overlooked witness, no hidden clue. The case remained unsolved, yet investigators were determined to keep it in the public eye. One of the more unusual methods they employed came the following year. Police had previously released 6 facial composites depicting people they believed may have information about the murders. In 1967, those sketches were transformed into life-sized mannequins. The figures were displayed at the Sydney Easter Show, one of the largest public events in the country. Thousands upon thousands of visitors passed. The strategy was simple. Someone might recognize a face. Someone might finally put a name to one of the unidentified individuals seen around Wanda Beach. If that happened, it could trigger the breakthrough detectives had spent years chasing. The response was considerable. The display attracted attention from the public and the media alike. But when the Easter show ended, the result was the same one investigators had encountered time and time again. There was no breakthrough. The identities behind the faces remained unknown. Then, just as hopes were fading once again, an incident occurred that reignited public fears. On the 17th of March 1967, a 28-year-old woman named Brenda Galvin was spending the day at Wanda Beach with her 3 children. It should have been an ordinary family outing. Instead, it became another disturbing chapter in the area's history. Without warning, an unknown man approached and attacked her. Fortunately, a witness named Trevor Betts was nearby. Seeing the assault unfold, he rushed to intervene. The attacker immediately fled the scene. Both Brenda and Trevor provided descriptions of the man to the police. Investigators were stunned by what they heard. The description closely resembled one of the unidentified men depicted in the police sketches connected to the Wanda Beach murders. For the first time in years, some detectives wondered whether the person responsible for killing Marianne and Christine had surfaced again. Public interest surged. The possibility was difficult to ignore. The attack had occurred at the same beach. The offender's appearance appeared familiar, and the willingness to target a lone woman echoed some of the concerns investigators had long held about the Wanda killer. Yet, proving any connection was another matter entirely. Police launched an extensive investigation. Witnesses were interviewed. Searches were conducted. Every effort was made to identify the attacker. Nothing worked. The man vanished, just as the Surfy had vanished, just as so many other persons of interest had vanished. Whether the attack on Brenda Galvin was connected to the murders of Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock remains unknown. It may have been a chilling coincidence, or it may have represented a missed opportunity to identify a dangerous offender. Either way, the investigation again found itself staring at a familiar outcome, a promising lead, a compelling theory. No evidence, no arrest. As the years passed, the Wanda Beach murders slowly transformed from an active investigation into something else. A mystery. A case discussed in newspapers, books, and television programs. A crime that seemed to linger in the Australian consciousness long after many other cases had faded from memory. Yet, while public attention gradually shifted elsewhere, investigators continued examining possible suspects. Over time, 3 names would emerge more often than any others. Each man had supporters, each man had detractors, and each man represented a different theory about who might have killed Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock. In part 2, we will continue to find out about the suspects. Until then, this has been The Eclectic. Stay curious, stay questioning, and as always, stay eclectic.